Good evening. So glad that you could join us again tonight for our midweek service here at Bethel Bible Baptist Church. It seems these weeks they go by very quickly, but we're so glad that you're continuing to be supportive of this ministry and supportive of the church. We count it a privilege to serve you, and in the process of seeking to serve you, certainly God has blessed me. Now, tonight, I want to look, if you will, at John chapter 12, St. John chapter number 12. There's something that got my attention in the reading of this particular chapter, St. John chapter number 12. Now, we're going to focus on verses 4 through 6, but let me just read by way of context, starting with verse number 1 of chapter 12. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Now notice verses 4 through 6. Then said one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag and bare what was put therein. And so we we can see here a window into what was going on with this disciple who was known as Judas. And that caused me to think about several things. And I want to focus on these 3 verses because Judas there, he asked the question. Basically, and I'm translating this, could this money not have been used for a greater good or for a better purpose? And then it goes on to say, tell us what his real motivation was for having this money to be diverted or going somewhere else. And that causes me to give you the title of our message tonight. It's simply this: compassion or self-interest. Compassion or self-interest. Was Judas, if you will, was he showing compassion or was he showing self-interest? Now, I want to define those words as we proceed. The word compassion is sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. And many of us at different times have experienced compassion where we just had a certain sympathy because someone was struggling or because they had suffered some great misfortune. But that's what compassion is: having pity and concern for the suffering or for those who are misfortunate. And then there's the word self-interest. What do we mean by self-interest? Or what is my self-interest, if you will? Well, self-interest is a concern for one's own advantage and well-being acted out of self and fear. So when one is practicing self-interest, it is a concern for one's own advantage and well-being acted out of self and fear. And so we have to ask ourselves a question. Is Judas practicing compassion or is he practicing self-interest? Now, as I pondered that, I thought about this question. What's the difference between self-interest and selfishness. What's the difference between self-interest and selfishness? Well, I think one of the differences is, and I want to read the statement, if you are acting in your own self-interest, you are compensated financially for providing a desirable service or product. Therefore, you prosper as a result or as the result of helping other people. So when one acts in his self-interest, he's normally compensated, or there's recompense, or he's paid something, usually financially, because he's providing a service that's needed. And you do that, you prosper supposedly as a result of helping other people. Well, selfishness is different. Selfish people, not people of self-interest necessarily, but selfish people don't care what they have to do to get money. They have no ethics, morals, or standards. And so to them, you see, we're going to see self-interest doesn't necessarily have to be bad, but you're doing something in order to be compensated for it. You're providing a service, but it's going to benefit you. But usually self-interest carries a negative connotation with it. And sometimes it's even used interchangeably with selfishness, even though they're different. And one of the reasons I say that too is when I made the statement that self-interest doesn't necessarily have to be bad. Self-interest doesn't always have to be bad, but can lead to people doing immoral or bad things. You know, if I'm producing a product and I'm producing that product is going to benefit many people, that's a great thing. But I'm also expecting to be compensated for it or rewarded for it. But I'm providing a product. But sometimes that's not the case. So sometimes self-interest can be good, but most of the time and many times is usually perceived as being bad. A selfish person, again, you throw everything out the window with a selfish person. They don't care what they have to do. They're only concerned about themselves, whether they're providing a product or benefit to a person or to people or not. And so self-interest is different from selfishness. And people of self-interest are different from selfish people. And I think as we consider the passage tonight, I think it's obvious that Judas is acting in his own self-interest. I don't think he has any compassion at all for the poor. As a matter of fact, verse 6 tells us that. He says, this he said, talking about Judas, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and he had the bag. He was the one that was responsible for the money. He was a treasurer, if you will. And he bare what was put therein. He was concerned about what was coming into the collection plate, if you will. And he just used that as a pretext when he said this money could have been used for the poor. But he wasn't concerned about the poor. He was concerned about keeping the money. And the more I pondered that, the more I thought about the different scenarios. And I want to give you several examples of something for you and I to consider, because I think we see this idea being exhibited in our society today, that there are more people that they give the impression that they have compassion, when in reality it's all of self-interest. It's all self-interest. It's how they can be advantaged from it. And I want to give you just several examples. We can ask ourselves the question. Take, for instance, the situation in Haiti. The island was devastated. And there are many people who are saying we need to do something about it. Many are saying we need to give U.S. Aid, or aid needs to go to help those people. And that rightly could be an act of compassion. But sometimes, instead of being an act of compassion, we will exploit or we will take advantage of a third world country. We'll give them something, expecting something in return. Not that we're really concerned about the Haitian people or the plight that they're in or the suffering of the people, the lack of running water and all these kind of things, the catastrophic damage that's been done there. No, we're concerned about, boy, if we make an investment into this island or we put some money in it, there's something we can get out of it. And in the process of doing that, sometimes we forget about the devastation of those people. Could care less about them. It's more about self-interest than it is about compassion. What about these drug companies, these pharmaceutical companies in the era of COVID? Is it really about the people being made well? Or is it an opportunity to make a lot more money? That's a question that needs to be asked. Is it really about the health of the people? Are we really concerned about the people that are suffering and the horrific damage that this virus is doing? The other companies that produce these drugs, are they really thinking about the gravity of the problem? Or are they thinking about all the profits and all the returns they can get on investments? And are they thinking about the stock market, which is self-interest, not necessarily compassion for the people who have been affected by the virus? What about these political parties, whether it's Republican or Democrat, and their position as it relates to these soldiers that were in Afghanistan? Is it about the compassion for the soldiers? Is it about the ones whose families are now suffering because there were those who died? Or are these political parties really taking a position as relates to this tragedy for political advantage and self-interest? They see it as an opening to enhance their party's reputation, or they're trying to spin it in such a way that they can win the next election. It's really not about these families, and it's really not about these soldiers. They are just pawns. It's really about someone who is so concerned about their self-interest as it relates to their political affiliation. They take the positions that they take because they think there's gain, there's advantage in it. That's self-interest, not necessarily compassion. What about what's happening with that Hurricane Ida and the devastation that is being wrought down in Louisiana and other states, and the power that many have lost, millions have lost power? Is it about the devastation of the people in that area? Or is it about the oil rigs or the gas production being affected? And now, because of that, they're more concerned about how much is going to cost me at the pump. How much is gas going to cost me? How much is the oil production going to be affected by the storm? It's not about the residents of Louisiana and Mississippi and these other states. No, it's about how will it affect me? Self-interest. If I have to pay more for gas and oil, that's what I'm concerned about. And again, this is not all inclusive, but I'm just saying these can be instances of where we are not really practicing compassion. We're really more concerned about self-interest. We're concerned about the effects of the hurricane on things and not necessarily on the people. You see, Judas was concerned about things. He was concerned about the money. He didn't care anything about Jesus' feet being anointed, and the price of that ointment and the poor. He wasn't concerned about that. He was concerned about keeping the money. And the same is true today. What about Afghanistan, the country in general? Is there compassion for the women and the children that are going to be subjugated as a result of Islamic law? Is it about them? Or is it about just what's in America's best interest? What's in our interest to, as it relates to a nation to get out? That term is being bandied about. What's in our national interest? Well, who determines what's in our national interest? Obviously, somebody does. But to what price? To what cost? Are we concerned about the conditions in Afghanistan and the people, in particular these girls and women? And some Americans that are still there? Are we concerned? Do we have compassion for them? Or is it more about our national interests, just getting out at all costs? We need to ask ourselves a question. What is it? What is really our motivation? Is it self-interest or is it compassion? What about preachers and churches? Is it really about helping the people? Is it really about their spiritual condition, whether they go to heaven or whether they go to hell, and whether if they apply biblical principles, God will bless their lives? Is it about that, or is it more about us looking good because we can build a bigger building? Is it about having a bigger ministry instead of, is it about the people? Is there real compassion for the people that have been devastated by the sinful conditions and a sinful lifestyle and not knowing the truth of the scriptures? Is it about that? Is it about the compassion for the neighborhood or for the community? Or is it about just having a bigger building? One that will make me look better, so that Reverend so-and-so, or Dr. so-and-so at that particular church, that's the biggest church in the city, and has a reputation and has an air about it. Is it about that? Is it compassion for the neighborhood or for people? Or is it about self-interest? Judas can tell us that, can't he? Well, what about the governor or the president or the CDC guidelines as it relates to these mandates and as it relates to this mask wearing? Is it really about the care and the safety of the people when all these arguments are taking place, all these laws are being passed or not passed? What is it really all about? Is it motivated by compassion, or is it motivated by, I just want to have more control over the lives of the people? Whether it's the CDC, whether it's the president, whether it's the governor. What is it really about? Is it about compassion for the people, that you wear a mask or you have these guidelines? Or is it really about, I just want to be able to tell people what to do and control people's lives and take away their freedom? That's a question everyone needs to ask themselves. But if we look at what happened with Judas, we certainly ought to give us an opportunity to evaluate our motives. Is it about compassion or is it about self-interest? All that's involved, I think we need to ask ourselves that question. What about the immigration laws and the border enforcements, the southern border in particular? Is it about compassion for the people? Is it about compassion for the people that are fleeing? Is it about compassion for those that are refugees? Or is it really we enforce the border selectively? Is it about what will enhance our own self-interest? For some parties, it's more about cheap labor. Let anybody come in. More labor, more cheap labor, more profits for us. For others, it's about more voters so we can win the next election. Most parties a lot of these political parties, they have their own self-interest. They're not really concerned about the people. There's no compassion for the plight of the people. No, it's about how it's going to help us, whether it's cheap labor or whether it's more votes. Something for us to really think about. That's what a lot of this immigration is about. And obviously, there are people, some that are anti-immigrant, nativists, if you will. So we need to ask ourselves, is what we're doing, is it motivated by compassion or is it motivated by self-interest? I dare to say in most cases, probably self-interest. What about these athletic coaches and players and these athletic conferences that are merging and getting bigger? Is it really about the college players or the athletes or the athletic activities? Is it about the safety of the players? Or is it more about the profit that we're going to make by more games? Self-interest. Billionaires becoming more wealthy. Millionaires becoming more wealthy. Is it really about those students that are struggling, who need some assistance as they're going to education? Certainly, these colleges are making a lot of money. Somebody is benefiting from these athletic activities. We need to ask, is it about the compassion for the people? Do I want to give them a stipend or do I want to give a salary to help them out because we're benefiting from it? Or is it about self-interest? We want bigger conferences. We want more games because really we want more money. Is it compassion or is it self-interest? And then maybe last, what about the home? Husbands, wives, children. Do the things that you do, is it about compassion or is it about what's in your own self-interest? Husbands, wives, is it about compassion? Or is it about you want a favor from your mate? Or you want a favor from your children? Or you want a pleasure from your mate? Or you want permission from your mate so that you can do what you really want to do? You know, we need to ask ourselves about our motivation as being a part of a family, as being a part of being a spouse or a parent. Why do I want that child to make a good grade? Why do I want that? Is it because of me? My self-interest makes me look good? And I can put a banner on my car, proud parent, which is really almost pride in it in of itself, isn't it? But why do I want that? Is it compassion? You know, the student, my student, my child, they might be really struggling to make a good grade. But I don't see that because I'm only concerned about my self-interest, what they do that'll make me look good. And it's the same way with the husband and the wife situation. We want to live in this neighborhood, this house, drive this car, not because of compassion. No, it's because of self-interest. So I think you can see, if we want to see, that Judas is trying to teach us something. And I think that we can learn much from Judas because the Bible makes it plain what the issue is here. He says, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? Boy, it sounds noble, doesn't it? Sounds really nice. Has the right appearance, doesn't it? But notice what his real motivation was. This he said, not that he cared for the poor. Wasn't about compassion, but because he was a thief and had the bag and bear what was put therein. You know, there at the Last Supper, and this will be the last scripture I share with you, but at the Last Supper, this act came up because they were talking and Jesus had said that one of them would betray him. That's in John chapter 13, verse 21. Jesus said, verily, verily, I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. And that, curiosity of the other disciples was at a heightened state. And they wanted to know who it was. And since John was the closest, he was the disciple who laid his head on Jesus' breast. He was the closest. And Peter said, ask him, who is it? You can read this for yourself. And Jesus said in verse 26, Jesus answered, he it is to whom I shall give a sop when I have dipped it. And when he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, the same one we're talking about tonight. And after the sop, Satan entered into him. Then said Jesus unto him, that thou doest, do quickly. Now no man at the table knew for what intent he spake this unto him. No, but notice, verse 29. For some of them, the other disciples, they thought because Judas had the bag, that Jesus had said unto him, buy those things that we have need of against the feast. That's what they thought maybe Jesus meant by whatever you're going to do it quickly. Or that he should give something to the poor. Some thought maybe he was telling Jesus to give money to the poor. But that wasn't what Judas wanted to do. Again, it wasn't about compassion. Verse 30, he then, having received the sop, went immediately out, and it was night. And of course, he went on to betray our Lord. Jesus knew what he was going to do. He exposed him. It was revealed that Judas's heart was not right with God, and it never was about compassion. And that's something I need to ask myself. You need to ask yourself, do the things that we do, are they about compassion, or are they really about self-interest? I'll close tonight. I was reading a verse in Psalm chapter 39. I'd encourage you to read the whole Psalm, but it says something in verse 5 of Psalm 39. It says, behold, thou hast made my days as an handbreadth, and mine age is as nothing before thee. Notice this. Verily, every man at his best state is altogether vanity. Selah. In other words, he basically tells us we need to consider man on his best day, in his best state. He is vanity. He's vain. He's useless. In other words, when you look at the grand scheme of things, the things that we do are motivated by things that are vain, self-interest. And the psalmist says, even on our best day, we're all together vanity. We practice vanity. And certainly that's reflected. And so the challenge to you and the challenge to me tonight is what we're going to be doing. Is it going to be motivated by compassion, or is it going to be motivated by self-interest? Is it really about what we can gain out of it, not necessarily what we can give and show pity and concern to others, including those in our own house? God help it to be true, that it'll be motivated by compassion and not out of self-interest. Judas can teach us some things tonight if we just listen to what he has to say. Thank you so much for listening tonight, and have a good week.